In 1962, a duet called Don't Let Me Cross Over rocked the country music world, becoming one of the biggest hits of all time. The vocals belonged to Carl and Pearl Butler, a married couple who became top stars at the Grand Ole Opry thanks to this song. But behind the spotlight was a sad story. As musical tastes changed, they were slowly forgotten by the industry that once celebrated them. Today we tell the story of Carl and Pearl Butler, a story of an immortal hit and a career that was lost to silence, a tragic example of the forgotten voices of the Opry stage. To understand the dream that drove Carl Butler, you have to understand the world that built it. This was not the polished world of Nashville. This was a place where country music was raw, traditional, and woven into the daily lives of its residents. At the center of this world was Knoxville, a bustling city with its own vibrant music scene centered around powerful radio stations like WNOX and WIVK. It was in this environment that Carl Roberts Butler, born in Knoxville in 1927, came of age. He was steeped in the traditions of the region, his musical soul shaped by the two towering figures of the genre, Roy Acuff, the king of country music and the heart of the Grand Ole Opry, and Hank Williams, the brilliant, tortured poet of the honky-tonks. From Acuff, Carl learned the power of a heartfelt, sincere vocal delivery. From Hank, he learned how to write and sing about the raw, painful truths of life and love. Carl wasn't a teenage prodigy who burst onto the scene. His was a story of a long, slow, and often frustrating apprenticeship. He started his professional career in his early 20s, working as a DJ and performer on those Knoxville radio stations. He formed his own bands, playing in rough-and-tumble beer joints and clubs all over East Tennessee. He was paying his dues night after night, learning how to hold an audience and how to sing over the noise of a rowdy crowd. He was a traditionalist to his core. His sound was pure, undiluted honky-tonk with a strong bluegrass influence. It was music meant for crying in your beer, for dancing away your troubles. His voice was a powerful, reedy tenor filled with the unmistakable, high lonesome sound of the mountains. He was a gifted songwriter, penning tunes that were deeply personal and emotionally resonant. In the early 1950s, he got his first big break, signing a recording contract with Capitol Records. He released a string of singles, solid, well-crafted honky-tonk numbers like Country Mile and Angel of Sin. But major success eluded him. He was a respected musician within the Knoxville scene, a big fish in a small pond, but he couldn't seem to break through on the national level. Nashville, just a few hours down the road, felt like a world away. During this time, he became close friends with two other struggling musicians who shared his love for traditional harmony singing, Ira and Charlie Louvain, the Louvain brothers. They recognized in Carl a kindred spirit, another artist committed to preserving the raw, emotional heart of country music. They would often perform together, their voices blending in the tight blood harmony style that was their trademark. The Louvains would go on to become legends, but in the 1950s they were all just part of the same grind, hoping for that one lucky break. For over a decade, Carl Butler toiled in relative obscurity, a talented and dedicated artist waiting for his moment, a moment that seemed like it might never come. While Carl was building his career in Knoxville, a woman named Pearl D. Jones was living a quieter life. Unlike Carl, she wasn't a seasoned professional musician. She was a country music fan who loved to sing, possessing a sweet, unassuming voice that was the perfect complement to Carl's more powerful emotional style. They met, fell in love, and in early 1962 they were married. It was a partnership that would, in a way neither of them could have possibly imagined, change their lives and the landscape of country music in an instant. By this point, Carl had moved to Nashville and signed a new contract with Columbia Records. He was still a solo artist, still making the traditional honky-tonk music he loved. He had a minor hit with a song called Honky Tonkitis, but he was far from a star. He was in his mid-30s, and the window for a major breakthrough seemed to be closing. Then one day, a songwriter named Penny J pitched him a new song she had written. It was a classic country cheating song, but with a twist. It was written from the perspective of a person in a relationship tempted by an old flame, begging their partner for the strength to resist that temptation. The song was called Don't Let Me Cross Over. Carl loved the song immediately. It was a perfect piece of country songwriting, a miniature 3-act play filled with drama and heartache. He took it to his legendary producer at Columbia, Don Law, the man who had produced classic records for artists like Johnny Cash and Ray Price. Law also loved the song, but he had an idea. He felt the song's back-and-forth narrative of temptation and forgiveness would be far more powerful as a duet. Carl was hesitant. He was a solo artist, and he had never considered recording with his new wife, Pearl. By all accounts, Pearl herself was even more reluctant. She wasn't a professional singer and was terrified of singing on a major label record. The story goes that Carl even told his producer that Pearl's voice wasn't right, that it was too soft and untrained. But Don Law had an instinct. He heard a unique, vulnerable quality in Pearl's voice that he believed would be the perfect counterpart to Carl's raw, emotional tenor. He insisted. Reluctantly, Carl and Pearl went into the studio in the fall of 1962. The result was pure, unadulterated magic. The contrast between their voices was breathtaking. Carl sang the verses with a desperate, pleading anguish, the voice of a man on the brink of sin. Pearl's voice, sweet and clear, floated in on the chorus, a sound of gentle, loving reassurance. The record was a masterpiece of emotional tension and release. It was the sound of a relationship hanging in the balance, a sound that resonated deeply with anyone who had ever felt the pull of temptation or the fear of loss. Don't Let Me Cross Over was released in late 1962, and it didn't just climb the charts, it exploded. It shot to #1 on the Billboard Country chart and stayed there for an astonishing 11 weeks, through the end of 1962 and into 1963. It was a colossal, once-in-a-lifetime smash hit, one of the biggest-selling country duets of all time. It crossed over to the pop charts, making Carl and Pearl Butler household names across America. The success was so sudden and so overwhelming, it was disorienting. After more than 15 years of struggling, Carl Butler was at long last a superstar, and Pearl, the woman who had never sought the spotlight, was now one of the most famous female voices in country music. Their timing had been impeccable, marrying and launching a legendary career in the very same year. Propelled by the massive success of their hit, they were immediately invited to become members of the Grand Ole Opry in December of 1962. Standing in that famed circle on the stage of the Ryman Auditorium, their dream had not just come true, it had been exceeded beyond their wildest imagination. For Carl and Pearl Butler, this was the summit of the mountain, the golden era where it seemed the music and the success would never end. Life as a member of the Grand Ole Opry in the 1960s was the pinnacle of the country music world. For Carl and Pearl Butler, it was a dream realized. They were now part of the Opry family, sharing the stage every weekend with their heroes, legends like Roy Acuff, Ernest Tubb, and their old friends, the Louvain brothers. They were bona fide stars, their lives a whirlwind of touring, recording sessions, and Saturday nights under the bright lights of the Ryman. Their smash hit had defined them, and their lives now revolved around that perfect 3-minute encapsulation of their sound. On stage, their chemistry was palpable. Carl was the seasoned, confident showman, while Pearl projected a shy, gentle grace. Their performance of Don't Let Me Cross Over was always the highlight of their set, a moment of shared, hushed intimacy with the audience. The song was more than just a hit. It was their story, a public declaration of the love and trust that formed the foundation of their marriage. They were embraced by the Nashville community. They were seen as guardians of the traditional country sound, a welcome anchor in a sea of changing musical tastes. One little-known fact that speaks to Carl's deep roots in the music is his close relationship with the family of Hank Williams. After Hank's tragic death, Carl became a friend and mentor to Hank's son, a young Hank Williams Jr., who was just starting his own career. Carl even recorded several of Hank Senior's songs, paying tribute to the man who had been one of his greatest inspirations. This wasn't a calculated career move, it was a genuine expression of respect and love for the music's history. Riding the wave of their massive hit, they tried to replicate its success. They released a string of follow-up duets, many of them excellent songs that captured the same emotional intensity. Songs like Loving Arms, I'm Hanging Up the Phone, and Just a Message were minor hits, briefly cracking the top 40. But lightning refused to strike twice. The once-in-a-generation magic of Don't Let Me Cross Over proved impossible to recreate. The pressure from the record label was immense. Columbia Records wanted another blockbuster hit, and they began pushing Carl and Pearl to record more commercial, up-tempo material. But their strength and their identity was in the heartbreaking ballad. They were caught in a classic music industry trap. Their biggest success had also pigeonholed them, and they struggled to break free from its shadow. The personal toll of this pressure was significant. In interviews, Carl would express a quiet frustration. He was grateful for the success of Don't Let Me Cross Over, but he also felt it had overshadowed the rest of his work, his years of songwriting and performing as a solo artist. He was now, and forever would be, known for that one song, that one perfect duet with his wife. As the 1960s wore on, the ground began to shift beneath them. The Nashville music industry was in the midst of a major transformation. The raw, honky-tonk, and bluegrass-influenced sounds of artists like Carl were being replaced by the slick, pop-inflected Nashville sound. While Carl and Pearl had benefited from the sophisticated production of their big hit, their overall style was still too traditional, too country, for the new direction the industry was heading. By the late 1960s, their records had stopped charting altogether. In 1970, after 8 years and a dozen albums, Carl and Pearl Butler were dropped by Columbia Records. The dream run was over. The golden era had faded, and they were now facing the long, uncertain twilight of a career that had once burned so brightly. On paper, the Opry has always promoted itself as more than just a stage show. It's a fraternity, a lifelong home for its members. Once you're in the family, you're supposedly in for life. This was the promise that drew generations of artists to Nashville. For Carl and Pearl Butler, this promise was both a comfort and, ultimately, a hollow one. After they were dropped by their record label in 1970, their commercial career was effectively over. They no longer had hit records to promote, and the lucrative concert bookings that come with chart success dried up. Their one remaining connection to the spotlight was their lifetime membership at the Opry. They continued to perform there regularly throughout the 1970s and 80s. But their status had changed. They were no longer the headline stars who had electrified the audience a decade earlier. They were now legacy members, beloved by older fans, but largely unknown to the new generation of country music listeners. The final chapters of Carl and Pearl Butler's lives were lived far from the glare of the national spotlight. They settled into a quiet domestic life in Franklin, Tennessee, just outside of Nashville. They remained devoted members of the Opry, making the short drive to the new Opry House at Opryland every weekend to sing their one song for an audience of tourists and devoted fans. They were a constant, comforting presence, a living link to a golden age of country music. In 1988, on March 1st, Pearl Butler, his wife and singing partner of 26 years, died at age 60 from complications of thyroid disease, a disease that had caused her years of pain and treatment, marking the abrupt end of one of country music's most iconic husband and wife duos, who had defined the authentic honky-tonk sound. For Carl, the loss was devastating, not only personally, but also professionally, as he not only lost his wife, who had been with him since the early days of his career in Knoxville, Tennessee. Pearl's passing not only left an emotional void, but also pushed Carl into a period of professional decline as the country industry in the 1980s was shifting strongly to a more modern style with pop and rock influences, causing traditional duos like Carl and Pearl to be pushed to the margins, leading to Carl's increasing isolation as he tried to adapt without his partner. The man who had once famously sung "Don't Let Me Cross Over," a ballad about the fear of crossing the line of love, inspired by their own marriage and a symbol of their enduring bond, had now entered a world of deep sadness and loneliness. He continued to be a solo member of the Opry, where he and Pearl had joined in 1962 and became iconic with their weekly performances on the Porter Wagoner Show, but now he was a solitary figure haunted by the ghost of a once glorious duet, with appearances dwindling from weekly to sporadic, mostly on special occasions or tributes. His friends and fellow performers sensed a deep sadness in him, the dull ache of a man driven by habit. His performances became less frequent, his presence on the Opry stage a poignant reminder of all he had lost. On September 4th, 1992, just 4 years after his beloved wife Pearl died, Carl Butler died of a massive heart attack. He was 65, and here the story takes a final tragic turn. The Saturday night after his death, the Grand Ole Opry continued to perform as usual. But according to many who were there and listening, there was no grand tribute, no moment of silence, no line of remembrance from his fellow performers on the airwaves. The passing of Carl Butler, a 30-year member and singer of one of the genre's most iconic hits, was barely mentioned. The institution that had been his home seemed to have forgotten him. But that radio silence doesn't tell the whole story. While the Opry may have been silent, the community of musicians has not. At Carl's funeral, a contingent of the biggest names in country music turned out to pay their respects. His pallbearers included legends like George Jones, Carl Smith, Jack Green, and newer stars like Marty Stewart and Ricky Skaggs. The gesture underscored a profound truth. While the Nashville commercial machine may have abandoned Carl, his peers, the real artists, have never forgotten his talent and stature. For fans, the sadness was doubly palpable. They not only mourned the loss of an idol, but also felt anger and frustration at the industry's indifference. On traditional country music forums and in letters to music magazines, they expressed their grief. They shared memories of seeing their grandparents perform, of the sincerity in their voices. To them, Carl was not an outdated name. He was a vital part of their memory, a voice that had accompanied them for decades. His silence from the Opry was an injustice to them, further evidence that Nashville had turned its back on its roots. Carl Butler's passing was a quiet end to a once stellar career, but it also lit a fire in the hearts of those who truly loved his music. Ultimately, their legacy lies not in the Opry archives or in their long list of chart-topping hits. It lies in that perfect song, one that will probably live forever. It is a timeless tune that still plays on the radio, that still makes people feel something. that still tells a universal story of love and vulnerability. Their lives are a powerful and poignant reminder that fame is a fleeting and often cruel illusion. They were two people from humble beginnings who, in a single shining moment, captured the hearts of an entire nation. They reached the pinnacle and then spent the rest of their lives living in its long shadow. Their story is not one of failure, but a quiet testament to the enduring power of a single song, and a heartbreaking look at the cost of being remembered for only one thing until you're barely remembered at all.